Former United Nations Commissioner for Human Rights, Judge Navi Pillay, says the Durban Conference of Racism produced the most comprehensive document to try end racism, as well as discrimination, xenophobia, and other related intolerance. In 2001, Israel actually walked out in protest against the equation of Zionism with discrimination. The nations who boycotted this week's meeting did so in solidarity with Israel. So how will such actions actually impact things like critical discussions around reparations? Let's bring in Judge Pillay herself, who joins us now via our video link to shed a bit more light on this. And Judge Pillay, it's great to have you on the program. Thanks so much for making time for us. I'm tempted to ask you to give us a bit of context about this conference, but as you do that, I wonder what your thoughts and reflections are around the fact that more than 24 nations boycotted the 20th anniversary this week.
Good morning to viewers, and Ayanda, to you, thank you for having me. This is the 20th anniversary of what we call DDPA, the Durban Declaration on Racism and Program of Action. And now we are very proud of this document. The conference was held in my city, in Durban, and it began with a preamble and a vision statement that had been made by Nelson Mandela. We South Africans were praised for winning our struggle against racism in South Africa. So to us, this conference is very meaningful. So you're quite right, Ayanda. What happened is there was a walkout, and it was led by the United States, actually, led by Colin Powell, you remember. And they complained about language that was being proposed, equating anti-Semitism with racism. And many people I spoke to long after this conference, when I was High Commissioner, the Jews said they felt hurt and insulted by the Arab countries who abused them. And I said, but didn't that happen in the NGO conference, not in the main conference? And they said, no, the main conference as well. But the interesting thing is, immediately after that conference, the Foreign Minister of Israel noted on his website, and it's still there, because when I was High Commissioner, I read it myself, that this conference was a success for Israel. So then what happened? How did things change so much that they ganged up together? And during the review conference 8 years later, where I was in charge as the Secretariat, yes, even more states from Europe withdrew. The United States didn't attend. So one does question what is their commitment towards ending racism and racial discrimination, especially we all know how much black people and indigenous people are suffering all over the world, including in the United States. So this is a document we should be very proud of. It's comprehensive. It addresses all human rights issues as well, and importantly speaks of reparation and reparation for slavery, the consequences of slavery and colonization. And I should tell viewers how much resistance there is from developed countries, from the rich countries, to even a discussion on this subject of reparation.
Sure.
Now, I could tell you subsequent activities if you wish.
Yeah, we'll get to that in just a moment. I just want to iron out perhaps some of the more theoretical concepts being explored through a conference like this. I wonder, Judge Pillay, whether you feel, given the time that's lapsed since the conference first sat, that there's any clearer direction about ways through which something as elusive as racism can be ironed out. And I ask this because till this day, there are people who'll be able to describe to you what it feels like to be on the receiving end of racism, but in many respects, people on the other end are still struggling to identify ways through which they continue to perpetuate it.
I have to say that many countries, including in Europe, have passed their own laws to implement the Durban Declaration. They've devised programs of action to address racism. So we have to acknowledge that they've done so. And we in South Africa are a bit slow. We should pass a specific act to implement the Durban Declaration. Now, you are quite right when you look at the macro picture in the world. When you look at who are the migrants who are being treated so badly, pushed out from richer countries, racism is very much alive. Even in the Palestinian issue, there's elements of racism there as well. So it's a problem that has to be addressed collectively. What is being done is never mind about a few states withdrawing. The important thing is all the states of the world met in the UN General Assembly very recently, 31st December 2020, and they passed a very good resolution on the occasion of the 20th anniversary. So if you wish, I could talk a little bit about that so we'll know what all the countries of the world have committed to carry out in respect of ending racism. Let's
go there. Perhaps some just of the major highlights that you feel, some of the more substantial commitments that have been made.
Right. So this is 20 years after the adoption of DDA. The General Assembly adopted this resolution, and it sets out the theme for the commemoration of the 20th anniversary of the DDPA as follows: reparation, that's what we have to focus on, reparation, racial justice and equality for people of African descent, for a political declaration aimed at mobilizing political will at the national, regional and international levels for the full and effective implementation of DDPA. And the resolution emphasizes the critical importance of public support for the DDPA and the participation of civil society. And I endorsed this call as High Commissioner even earlier about greater democratic space for civil society and responding to the voices of victims. You know, you have the transatlantic trade in enslaved Africans, and colonialism were grave violations of international law. The GA resolution, that means all the member states acknowledge that it's a grave violation of international law, that international law obliges states, not just requests them, but places an obligation on states to make reparations proportionate to the harms inflicted and to ensure that structures in society that are perpetuating the injustices of the past are transformed. The voices on the streets here in our own country and in other former colonies demand to know why human rights to health, to justice, to education and clean water are not available to all, but continue to be treated as commodities for sale only to the elite. So civil societies have taken up this call to end the criminalization of poverty and police enforcement of the lower level of offenses. And I was very interested because as recently as 9th July 2021, my former office, the current High Commissioner for Human Rights, did a report about an agenda for transformative change for racial justice and equality. So no more are we just, using rhetoric to condemn racism or to moan about the past. There are now demands for a transformative agenda to reverse cultures of denials, dismantle systemic racism, accelerate the pace of action, end impunity for human rights violations, and enforcement. So these are very specific programs that are being adopted. And there was also a very interesting study conducted by the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights that indicates that racism and racial discrimination against Africans and people of African descent are often rooted in policies and practices grounded in the debasement of the status of individuals in society. And their impact is particularly apparent in states with a legacy or links to enslavement, to the transatlantic trade in enslaved Africans and or colonialism, resulting in the presence of sizable communities of people of African descent.
Pillay, if I can come in there, apologies to interrupt you, especially because these are all such important issues, and admittedly we're never going to be able to get through all of them in the limited time we have. What is encouraging, though, is that there are, more tangible, if you like, goals, aspirations to look forward to, even if it's just in the form of writing, moving away from, to use your words, just the rhetoric we had in the not so long ago history. But for now, I have to thank you for your time. I really do appreciate your indulgence on this important issue, and I hope there'll be an opportunity to continue ventilating it in the near future. Judge Navi Pillay is the former UN Commissioner for Human Rights, joining us there as we look back at the 20th anniversary of the Durban Conference of Racism.